Hello, I'm Ben Orchard.
And I'm Claire Fitzpatrick.
Welcome to Sword, Sorcery and Synthesizers, the 80s fantasy movie podcast. I'm coming to you from Adelaide.
And I'm in Brisbane.
But through the wonders of modern technology and the magic of Skype, we meet each week to discuss some beloved movie of a bygone era and see what lies behind the nostalgia. So Claire, we've had a few requests sent in to cover Highlander on the show. How about we talk about that?
Sounds good.
Yeah, you haven't had a chance to see it yet, have you?
No. So this is going to be an exciting conversation.
Yeah, how's about we just do this like Field of Dreams, the previous episode where you hadn't seen the movie and I just tried to explain to you the zany premise of the film.
That sounds good.
Yeah, Highlander is this very sort of peculiar film made in 1986. The central character is a guy named Connor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod, and he's born in 1518 in the village of Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel in the Scottish Highlands. And he fights in a battle when he's in like his late 20s, early 30s. It's like the 1530s when he fights in a battle with a rival clan and he's slain on the battlefield. And then a few days later, he rises from the dead. And unfortunately for him, the superstitious folk in his village, they don't think of him as like the second coming of Jesus. Instead, they sort of drive him out of the village with pitchforks and flaming torches, throwing rocks at him. He has to sort of trek by foot over a few mountains to another village where he can like reinvent himself as a blacksmith. This is like the days before passports and fingerprinting, when like all you had to do to reinvent yourself and establish a new identity for yourself was just like climb over a few hills and move to a different village.
Or wear a new cloak. Something different. Buy some new shoes.
Yeah. Anyway, our man Connor, he settles down in a new village, gets a job as a blacksmith, finds this, sweet young girl named Heather, and, it looks all set to settle down with her when this mysterious, Spaniard on a white horse, rides into his village and approaches him. He introduces himself as Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, chief metallurgist to King Philip II of Spain. And he says, he does that thing of like mentors in fantasy sagas where he's like, I sense that you are a special person with special powers, and I have sought you out to mentor you in various profound things.
Mm-hmm. Does there ensure a montage afterwards of Karate Kids?
Yes. Many training montages ensue. But basically, what Ramirez tells Connor is this: you are part of a select few group of people who are set apart from the rest of mankind. You are immortal. You cannot be killed by any means except decapitation. And MacLeod is like, but why? Who set me apart from the rest of mankind? Was it God? Is this part of some grand destiny? And Ramirez is like, well, why does the sun come up? Or are the stars just pinholes in the curtain of night? Who knows?
That's such nonsense. I always find it funny when there's no actual explanation. It's like, because you are, because I said so.
Well, yeah, he's just born special. And what Ramirez says to him is, what I do know is this: because you were born different, men will fear you and try to drive you away. So you have to learn to defend yourself. Also, other immortals will come for your head. Because when one immortal decapitates another in a sword fight, the soul, the life essence, and the accumulated knowledge of the fallen flows into the victor, and they absorb that person's, strength, power, and memories. And this process is called the quickening.
So are they sort of encouraged to kill each other? Like, destined to murder each other until, I don't know, one remains,
Have you looked at the poster for this?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay. The tagline for this movie that's on the poster that becomes a sort of catchphrase that is repeated throughout the whole film and the whole franchise pretty much is, there can be only one. And Ramirez tells him of a prophecy. He says that, one day in the future, all of the surviving immortals will gather together. They will feel a pull towards a faraway land to fight for the prize. And Connor's like, what is this gathering and what's the prize? And Ramirez is like, I don't know exactly. He says, all I know is that centuries from now, all of the immortals will gather together in one place and challenge each other to a series of sword fights until only one remains, and that one will gain the power to rule the world.
Are all the immortal men? Are they like a bunch of men who are supposed to end up in this epic battle, or are there any women who are immortals?
Oh, there are female immortals. There was one spin-off series called Highlander the Raven, which focused specifically on a female immortal who was also a cat burglar.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, over the centuries, MacLeod has the opportunity to, travel the world. He goes to Japan, he goes to France, he goes to Ireland, he goes to all kinds of different places. But he also learns more about the prophecy. Basically, in 1985, the gathering will take place in New York City. All of the immortals will challenge each other to a series of sword fights until only one remains. And that one will gain the power to basically read the minds of anyone on the planet from any geographical location.
Okay.
They can also telepathically communicate with anyone on the planet from any specific location. And the one will also, I guess, earn the gift of mortality and the ability to have children, because it's one of the rules of being an immortal is that immortals can't have children.
So it's sort of like a vampire who can procreate, I guess. Doesn't have to, suck blood to live. But it has some, immortality, certain powers, abilities, gifts, but can have children.
Yeah, basically. I mean, there are some other rules of being an immortal. They can sense the presence of another immortal. It's like their spider sense goes off. You know how Spider-Man can sense danger. Like when an immortal walks into the room and they, and there's another immortal there, they can feel this tingling up their spine, and there's this sort of sound effect on the soundtrack, and there's some other immortal is here. I better make sure I've got my sword ready.
Yeah, must prepare for battle.
Oh, another peculiar custom of immortals is that they refuse to fight on holy ground.
Why?
Regardless of whether it's like a monastery or a shrine or a graveyard, it's tradition. They won't fight on holy ground. Some say you're cursed with bad luck if you do this. Some just respect it as like a neutral ground where they can, negotiate, or they can make arrangements like, okay, we'll meet on holy ground to chat, and then we'll plan like a place we can meet later where there are no witnesses, and we can have our duel and, get the business of decapitation over with.
Does that also have anything to do with, I don't know, like, is there a religious aspect to being immortal? Because obviously, is that going against God? Because, why is God granting immortality in this sense? Or is there any kind of religious or explanation to immortality?
The film never provides an explanation as to why certain people are born immortal. They just are. And they never really, provide an explanation as to who first came up with this prophecy of there can be only one. It's just a thing that, immortals believe and they follow because it's tradition. I mentioned the Holy Ground rule. There's an evil immortal called the Kurgan. He's a black knight from Russia. And the word Kurgan actually means, I think, burial mound in Russian. Yeah, and he was born in like 1500 BC on the coast of the Caspian Sea. He actually is the one who slays Connor on the field of battle in the 1530s when he's fighting a rival clan. Because the Kurgan is so evil, he can't wait around for 1985 for the prophecy to come into effect. He's going to go and decapitate as many immortals as he possibly can and challenge them to duels whenever possible and take their power. He's obsessed with being the one remaining who will rule the world. The Kurgan only respects the Holy Ground rule because it gives him an excuse to insult and belittle another immortal to their face. There's one point where he meets with Connor in a church. He brags about how, I killed, your mentor. Like he squealed like a girl, and then I raped his woman. While he's there, he also sexually harasses some nuns and insults a priest and just generally behaves like a complete troll.
But he sounds so crazy. Sounds like such a crazy character. Like, but definitely a highly original antagonist, I would say. Like,
well,
weird.
Yeah. So, yeah, no sooner has Ramirez finished mentoring Connor than like the Kurgan comes and pays a visit and kills him. And Connor tries to settle down with his girlfriend Heather, despite the fact that she's mortal. And he retreats to this remote farm where they raise sheep together. And they first meet when she's 25. And he stays with her up to the point of her death when she's 80 or something.
Oh, okay.
And there's this touching scene where, because he still looks young and beautiful and everything. And she's on her deathbed, this decrepit crone. And she pleads with him, please, Connor, when I'm gone, remember me by lighting a candle and saying a prayer for me on my birthday. And he says, I will. And he honors that promise for I think it's 326 years or something. My math isn't good, but yes, he honors their love in this way, for the rest of his life, basically, which is a long life.
Does he not get another girlfriend for 326 years?
Oh, he does. He does have other love interests, which brings us to 1985. A few things have happened since then. I mean, Connor is he set himself up as an antiques dealer in New York City, and he's acquired a lot of creepy crap over the years. He can buy some silverware, he can buy some candlesticks or whatever. Just wait around 50 or 80 years for it to be worth a fortune, and then sell it. And now he's sort of really wealthy because of this. He's a big shot in the antiques business. Basically, he's accumulated a fortune by basically, hanging on to things, hoarding things.
I mean, that is really clever. You think about your vampires and other immortal creatures. How do they amass this wealth? What are they doing to have this business and they're, shadowy behind the scenes? Or how they continue to have this luxurious lifestyle? Antique business. That's actually clever.
Yeah, so Connor, by the power of hoarding, is now a wealthy man living in New York. There's flashback to his adventures in World War II fighting the Nazis, where he rescues this, little Jewish girl, and he adopts her as his daughter, and she helps him running the antique store. And 1985, as I said, is when The Gathering kicks in. all the immortals are gathering in New York City to challenge each other to swords fights. And naturally the cops think, there's a serial killer on the loose. There's all these decapitations happening around. And like Connor is the prime suspect. One of the forensics experts investigating it is this woman named Brenda. And she finds herself drawn to the sort of dark, mysterious, brooding Connor with his sort of George Michael style designer stubble and like hip long trench coat that is very useful for hiding a katana inside. And his love interest is also expert on medieval weaponry. She's published a book called A History of Metallurgical Sword Making. So she's also drawn to him because Connor's an antique expert. And
well, does she question Connor? Or is she like, well, himself?
Yes, of course, she questions him a great deal. And, eventually love blossoms between them as you would expect. It's still a better love story than Twilight. She's 35 years old. Highlander is a good example of how you can depict an age gap romance and have it not come across as too creepy. It's not like in Twilight where you have this 17-year-old or 18-year-old paired off with this 100-year-old vampire or whatever age Edward Cullen is supposed to be. The thing about Connor is that his love interests, the first love interest he has, Heather, they meet when they're both in their 20s, and he stays loyal to her until her death. The other love interests he has over the course of the films. In the first movie, it's Brenda. She's a forensics expert. She's 35 years old. And in the sequels, there's this 30-something ecologist that he romances in the second movie. And in the third movie, he becomes involved with a 30-something archaeologist. Connor's type seems to be really brainy women in their 30s. And they're always experts in some academic field that, he knows nothing about. There's the sense that the power dynamic isn't too skewed because they do know things he doesn't. And also, finally, it's just that if you're looking at the physical ages of the actors in this movie, the actress playing Brenda is actually 5 years older than the actor playing Connor. Not a huge age difference, but it's noticeable. It's really drives home the point that, he's attracted to her as much because of her mind and not just her body,
So I guess they make the ultimate power couple. It actually, it makes me think again of, the book series that I'm reading. So there's Feyre, who's a human, and Rethan, he's the High Fae Lord. And Feyre is only, I think she's 19 when she's taken. She ends up crossing over the human realm, fairy realm. And then, she meets the bad boy, Lord of the Night Court. And he's only a mere 516 years older than her. So the love interest in Highlander is nothing at all. That seems normal. General age gap.
Well, there's still centuries between them, but she's a mature woman.
She's not a 19-year-old girl. Yeah. That's the point I was trying to make. It seems I like the fact that it's not someone really young and who hasn't really learned things about the world. It seems like she's a really good character who's also aware of herself as a person. She's a fully formed, not just fully formed character, but a fully formed person who can have engaging conversation, who understands, life. So that's why I'm very happy about the age-appropriate love interest. As age-appropriate as you can be, I suppose.
The way it is with Connor is that Connor's immortality is a blessing, but it's also a curse. He can travel the world and see the rise and fall of various cultures, see history unfold before his eyes, take part in some of the most pivotal events in history. But there's this sense that he's always looking over his shoulder, ready for some evil immortal to challenge him and trying to take his head, challenge him to a duel. So he always has to be ready for a fight. And also there's forming attachments to people. If he forms an attachment to like a friend or a lover who is mortal, then eventually they're going to die and he'll have to deal with the grief of that. And if he falls in love with another immortal, then she, you know, could potentially die in a duel because it's a dangerous life they lead. They're always being challenged to sword fights, and because of the prophecy that there can be only one, like he has to face up to the possibility that like if I fall in love with an immortal woman, like even if we both survive, maybe it'll come down to just us two. Then we'll have to fight.
I get it. Like, yeah.
Well, and also the thing about Connor, as I said, although there's this prophecy that there can be only one, and there's great power to be gained by like one immortal killing another, is that he still has a code of honor and he doesn't, seek out other immortals just to kill them. There's a moment in the story where he has the opportunity to kill his mentor Ramirez when they're sparring, and like he comes up with a move that Ramirez doesn't anticipate, and Ramirez is knocked to the ground, and Ramirez gives him this look like he realizes like Connor could just kill me now and take my power, and Connor just looks at him for a few seconds and then just gives him his hand and just says like, "Give me your hand, brother," and helps him up. That's the thing. He's immortal, and like he kills people when he has to. He defends himself, but he doesn't, seek out other immortals just to take their power. So that's another thing that made him likable and made me think, well, like I could identify with this character more than like a vampire character like Lestat, because he doesn't, kill people when he doesn't have to.
Well, I think, that's one of the issues that immortals have to sort of grapple with is not just, being immortal, but like navigating like relationships. But I don't just mean like a love interest, but, friendships and things like that. And if there can, be only one, how are you supposed to befriend someone else who's also immortal and also wants, who also can conquer you? So I find that interesting how they're...
Well, there's a couple of scenes in Highlander that touch upon that. Connor has a African friend named Castigia who's also an immortal, and he meets up with him in Central Park when they realize that the gathering is in New York, and like they have a flashback to a party that Connor went to in like 18th century Boston where he got like blind drunk and a mortal person challenged him to a duel, not realizing that he was immortal, and like he got repeatedly stabbed and kept getting back up again. Anyway, they have this conversation and they realize like we've been friends for like hundreds of years, but sometime in the next few weeks one of us is going to die, and like they have no plans to challenge each other, but unless like they're the last two remaining. But still, it's a bittersweet moment where like they bond on all their shared experiences, but they realize that even though they're immortal, time will catch up with them eventually. And there's another touching scene where I mentioned like Connor fights in World War II and he saves this little girl from the Nazis, this Jewish girl named Rachel. And she, as a grown-up, she helps manage his antique store. And in the scenes in 1985, like she looks old enough to be his mother. She's in her like late 50s or something by this stage, and he still looks like he's in his early 30s. There's a flashback to when he first met her, and like Connor used himself as basically a human shield to stop her from being shot by a Nazi stormtrooper. And then we cut back to 1985, and like he's making preparations for like what if he gets beheaded, and he has to like make her the power of attorney and leave her his stuff and everything. And eventually she realizes like, you're not coming back. Even if you kill him, you're not coming back. You're just going to fake your own death and then leave me alone. And it's obvious this is because like Connor doesn't want to go through the pain of like seeing her, really old and dying, just like he did with his first wife, and sort of wants to spare her the pain as well.
Although I think I understand where he's coming from, but I think that's also something that you just have to deal with. Like, You know, like if you have these friendships with these people, and obviously he knew her as a child her entire life growing up, do you think that's something that he should be emotionally prepared for? I mean, like he'd live forever. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh on him.
Well, he's a flawed character, I guess. The other reason is to maintain his cover, because it's something he has to do like every 60 or so years, come up with a way to like fake his death and like leave his worldly goods to like babies who've died and then assume their identities. And the way that like Brenda, the forensics expert who's a consultant with police, the way she figures out that Connor is immortal is she goes to an archive where they keep like records of people's handwriting, and they use a computer to compare various records. And they find out that like all of these people dating back hundreds of years have the same handwriting. And that, and it's the same handwriting as like Connor has in the present day New York. And the archivist is like, what we've got here is like someone who's been creeping around since at least 1700, like leaving all his worldly good to, kids who died at birth and then assuming their identity.
I still don't see how you would connect that to like an immortal being. I don't know, like it would be suspicious. The handwriting pretty similar, but I just don't get how you go from similar handwriting to immortal being. Like immortal person.
Yeah, the archivist movie is a bit eccentric. His whole reaction to like finding out like, there's an immortal is like, how about that?
This is so random.
Well, but any doubts are silenced when like Brenda confronts Connor and like he confirms his immortality by stabbing himself in front of her and then coming back from the dead. That pretty much settles it. So there's one big epic final showdown between Connor and the Kurgan. And at the end of all this, Connor is the last of the immortals. He gains the ability to, I guess, have babies. And he also gains the ability to, as I said, telepathically communicate with anyone on the planet, read people's minds. So, like, he can spend a busy day, like, polishing, like, silverware at his antique store. Then he comes home and thinks to himself, I wonder what Ronald Reagan's thinking right now. I'll just meditate for a bit and tune in and, perhaps, give him some advice. Like, have you considered negotiating with the Russians, Ronnie?
Why? Because he's got nothing better to do. He needs some more hobby.
Okay, that's my theory. But as to what he does with the hour that he's been given. But yeah, Highlander, I'm not explaining it very well. Highlander is a very strange film because, like, it starts in 1985. It has one of the most, like, what the fuck openings I've ever seen of a film. Basically, it starts off with a voiceover narration from Connor's mentor, Ramirez, where he talks about how, from the dawn of time, there existed immortals and we have lived in secret among you. And then the theme song, comes in, which is this sort of hard-rocking 80s power ballad. Then we cut to a professional wrestling match, and Connor's in attendance, and he has flashbacks while he's watching the wrestlers, hurt each other in the ring. He has flashbacks to the battlefields of medieval Scotland, where people were like, swiping at each other with swords, and he senses the presence of another immortal, and he walks out to the parking lot, where this other immortal challenges him to a sword fight, and then he cuts off the guy's head, and then the quickening happens. And how do you imagine that, like, they visualize this process of soul transfer? How do you imagine this is visualized?
I have no idea. Like, I'm still kind of lost on are they flashbacks within flashbacks? So I'm just like, how is this chronological order?
Okay. What happens then is the way the quickening works is that there's this glow that emanates from the corpse of the immortal that's been decapitated. And then basically lightning flows out from the corpse to, the victor, to Connor. And Connor has this expression on his face, like whenever an immortal like whenever the soul transference takes place, they have this expression on their face like they're having the world's biggest orgasm or something. And they let loose with these high-pitched cries that cause all the glass in the immediate vicinity to break. So if you can just imagine, like, Connor's just decapitated this guy, his corpse starts glowing, lightning starts shooting into Connor's body, and he starts making these orgasm noises, and then, like, because it's a parking lot, all of the windshields of the cars and headlights of the cars, all of the glass, like, explodes just as he's crying out.
I'm thinking that, like, can you imagine just seeing that? Just casually walking by being like, what the hell is this? What is going on?
Well, the scene after this, where it cuts from this to, like, Connor making a high-speed getaway in his car and having flashbacks to his, early life in Scotland and, like, the first time he's killed on the battlefield. And then we cut back to 1985, where he's arrested by the cops. And we see the forensics team poring over the crime scene, and they're like totally at a loss, because there's like all of these cars that have like smashed, like, windshields, smashed headlights, and like the glass shows all the signs of exploding outward, and they're like, how's this possible? And then Brenda, the forensics expert, like, arrives on the scene, and she finds, like, the sword there, and she picks bits of metal out of the wall, and she's like, this sword that this guy was holding, this guy has just been killed. It's like a Toledo Salamanca broadsword. It's hundreds of years old. It's like worth $1 million. And like everyone on the crime scene is, what the fuck is going on? So yeah, like I said, the opening of Highlander is like one of the biggest, like, what the fuck moments in movies I've ever seen. It got my attention the first time I saw it, that's for sure.
It's like, I was just thinking, like, being a forensic kind of like scientist, finding these items and just thinking, like, where does this come from? And then I was just thinking to myself, yeah, the truth is stranger than fiction. The truth is beyond your wildest imaginings. And then is she then caught in the battle for, like, mankind, something like that? Is she then drawn into it? I guess as the love interest, and
like, their relationship doesn't get off to a great start. I mean, the main reason Connor is like the prime suspect is because they find this antique sword, and he's an antique dealer, and the cops assume, oh, he must have, like, argued with this guy about the price and then killed him, and then, like, fled the scene in a panic.
Is he the only antique dealer in the city? Like,
he's the only antique dealer that they see, like, fleeing from the scene at high speed in a car. So, but yeah, I mean, the way that Highlander unfolds, it doesn't tell the story in chronological order. It's kind of like making me think of like a Margaret Atwood novel. Like, it starts with this sword fight in 1985, and then Connor has flashbacks to his first death. Then we're back to 1985, and we see how the cops are investigating, Connor, and then we flash back even further again to Connor being mentored by Ramirez. And then back to 1985, and we see, like, this forensic scientist digging deeper into Connor's life and researching his background and finding all these, like, facts that don't add up, gradually being, like, drawn to this mysterious man personally as well. And, Connor feeling a sense of conflict because, like, I'm immortal, she's mortal. Is she just using me to solve this case? Is she using me because she's fascinated with, like, medieval weaponry and she thinks that I can lead her to, like, a valuable artifact? So
I was just going to add, it all seems so, like, slightly confusing. So I'm just trying to, like, imagine watching the film and being like, how do you, suddenly from, time jumping from this to this to this to this, like, I don't know. It just seems like there are so many things going on.
Well, here's the thing. It's not until, like, 1 hour into the film that it all comes together, that all of the rules that the immortals live by are explained, and you find out the extent of Connor's powers. You find out about the prophecy, why they keep challenging each other to sword fights, why there's, like, sword fights going on in mid-80s in New York City. Basically, the film relies upon the assumption that the audience will be so intrigued by the mystery of the opening and all of the like crazy things that are going on that they'll be hanging in suspense and they'll keep, following it, until like all of the information is revealed. That was the case. That was the case with me when I first saw it. I was like, whoa, crazy. This is so different. And like, I want to see how this mystery unravels.
Well, I was just thinking, like, so you have this film with all this kind of like mystical mumbo jumbo magic, time traveling, things like that. And then you have, this detective who's trying to figure it all out, who's suddenly expert in sword making. The evidence is just a sword. And then I guess, she can kind of fall in love. It actually seems like a very funny kind of 80s movie because it makes me think of like it seems to have all those aspects of an 80s film. I can understand why some people might find it convoluted, but I can also understand why people would really enjoy it.
So yeah, I've basically just explained the premise of this film. I haven't really gone into detail about the production values or the acting or the music. As for the production values, I mean, it was filmed by an Australian named Russell Mulcahy, who directed a lot of like music videos for like Duran Duran and Billy Joel and Elton John and Bonnie Tyler and a whole lot of other Spandau Ballet as well during the 1980s. And he has this very stylish like way of like shooting the 1980s sequences. Like they have this kinetic music video style. And then when he goes back to the flashbacks to medieval Scotland, it has this really sort of stately period film vibe to it. And it really establishes a strong contrast between, the present day action and all the flashbacks, I guess.
One of the things I was reading about, just general information, I guess, is that someone said, like, obviously the soundtrack is like very sort of like Queen music.
Yeah, the soundtrack to this was by the English rock band Queen, which, they're probably not the first like music act you'd think of to do the soundtrack to a film where like half of it is set in medieval Scotland and the other half is set in like New York.
No.
And the other thing about Queen is they're not a band that is renowned for their subtlety.
But then that's why it's good for sword fights and things like that, even if, they're clumsy or anything like that.
Look, I'm a big fan of Queen, and I've thought long and hard about what makes them so special. And to me, it's the combination of like really over-the-top theatricality in their performances. And it comes through in like, especially in Freddie Mercury's like delivery of like pretty much any Queen song. But a combination of that theatricality with this kind of, heart on sleeve earnestness. Like once Queen like set their mind on something, they commit to it 110%, like without any real sense of irony at all. And I think in that way, they're the perfect like fit for Highlander, which like if you stop and think about the central premise for like 5 minutes or something, you're thinking like, this is crazy, but they totally commit to it. Like, I don't know, the scene where Connor's wife dies and he's holding her in his arms as she dies is said to the tune of this song called Who Wants to Live Forever? By Queen. And it's such a tearjerker. It really pulls at the heartstrings. And there's this really over-the-top, unhinged rock song called Don't Lose Your Head, which has these pounding drums on it. And it segues into Freddie Mercury doing this like really deranged cover of New York, New York. And it happens when like the Kurgan, the evil villain of the piece, he abducts Brenda to use her as a hostage to like lure Connor into a fight. And he steals a car and decides to like drive against the traffic, playing chicken with cars and trucks and motorcycles. Because like he's immortal and he can get away with that, so he just like drives full speed against the traffic, and
I do what I want.
And he rejoices at like the screaming of the woman next to him, like what are you doing? You're insane. there's a whole lot of other great songs. The main theme song, Princes of the Universe, is very anthemic. Yeah, and it's not just the Queen soundtrack. The film features this really elegant orchestral score by Michael Kamen. And Michael Kamen is one of those composers who isn't very well known these days. I mentioned in like the episode we did on Conan the Barbarian how I thought the composer of that score, Basil Polydorus, was a really underrated composer, one of the most like underrated of the 20th century. And I think like if there's a second spot for like most underrated, it might be Michael Kamen. He probably best known for doing the soundtrack to a 90s film called Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because the love theme he composed for that movie had like words put to it, and it became a hit song for Bryan Adams called Everything I Do It For You.
Oh, so that song, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Michael Kamen's soundtrack to this is just as majestic as, and just as like, it has the same sort of swashbuckling flair as the music he did for Robin Hood. Or like another score he did in the 90s that I really like was a 1993 film of The Three Musketeers. He did the soundtrack to that too. And yeah, that had a lot of sword fighting in it. And so yeah, the soundtrack he does for Highlander is just fantastic. Okay, the main thing that is both sublime and ridiculous about this film are the performances of the actors that they chose for the main roles. Now, tell me, Claire, how important is it to you when you're watching a film that the actors speak with the correct accent, an accent that is appropriate to the time period and geographical location?
Okay. I think this depends. So obviously, speaking of, Scottish Highlands, and I've mentioned Outlander. So I've watched the latest season of Outlander, and a lot of the early part of it is set in Scotland. Now, I appreciate the Scottish accents there because it's such a big thing. And it would be really weird if suddenly there was some French guy, like some French accent. So I really think it depends on, one, the seriousness of the film or TV show. Two, like, if it really needs to be historically accurate, if that's an essential part of it. But then three, I think if it's a film that's not trying to take itself too seriously, or of course has limited budget, then I think it's okay sometimes to have actors from different regions of the world with different accents. However, saying that, I feel like it'd be so weird if suddenly there was like a bunch of Scottish accents and then, a Kiwi accent, something like that. Or suddenly like a British accent. I think that would throw the dynamic off. So, depends.
For the role of Connor, they cast Frenchman Christophe Lambert, or Christopher Lambert, as he is better known to most people in the English-speaking world. And for the scene set in medieval Scotland, he, affects a Scottish accent that occasionally slips into French, but is mostly passable. During the scene set in the present day, he kind of affects this weird kind of transcontinental accent where he mixes elements of English pronunciation, American, French, Scotch. Swear there are some scenes like he throws in some sort of South African or Japanese inflection. Like, it's not clear from one scene to the next, like what his accent is going to sound like. And like, there's this funny scene where like one of the cops is interrogating him and says like, "No, you talk funny. Where you from?" He responds, "Lots of different places."
That just sounds creepy. But is that ever explained? Is that just the only explanation he gives?
The idea is, I guess, that he's traveled a bit, and like a lot of people, as I mentioned, like actors who've traveled, they pick up a bit of like all the places they go. It becomes part of their speech patterns just through force of habit,
Yeah.
And I have met people who've traveled a bit, and they have this odd like mixture of accent to their manner of speech.
I guess so. It's also probably a good thing that the actor can get away with it because he's just being a character. It doesn't matter that he can't do the accent properly. His character wouldn't have a perfect accent.
And I think the thing about Lambert's performance is that it comes across as more odd juxtaposed with the actor playing Ramirez, who is a Spaniard. Although at one point in the story he claims to be an Egyptian. So I guess Ramirez isn't his real name, but we never find out. We never find out his real name, and he spends most of his screen time like dressed up in Spanish attire, and everyone just calls him Ramirez.
That's very different culture.
They cast one of the most Scottish actors who's ever lived, Sean Connery.
Oh my god.
And the other thing is, like, Sean Connery doesn't even try to do an accent. He just uses his natural Scottish accent.
But like, you can't believe that he's some sort of, I don't know, magical creature, alien thing. Like, you can't. I don't know. Like, how do you believe that?
There's one scene in the movie that's like comedy gold on so many levels. You know what haggis is? It's like one of the signature dishes of Scottish cuisine is haggis.
Yep.
Yeah, well, there's a scene where Connor tries to explain to Ramirez what haggis is. And Ramirez reacts with like shock and revulsion. And if you can imagine someone who, has this shaky Scottish accent that's slightly French, explaining to this guy what haggis is, and he pretends not to know, and he expresses shock in like a Scottish accent, like haggis, you say? Like what's haggis? And it's like sheep's stomach stuffed with meat and barley. How revolting!
Oh my god, it does sound revolting anyway.
Just to round things off, I mentioned that the bad guy in this, the evil Black Knight that dogs Connor's footsteps, is Russian. And they cast an American actor, Clancy Brown, and he plays this Russian character with an American accent all through the film.
Why? Why can't the character just be American then? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, because America hadn't been discovered yet when, like, character is supposed to have been around, but...
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, unless I'm guessing he'd leave an impression then. Like... God.
But yeah, you've got a Frenchman playing a Scotsman. You've got a Scotsman playing a Spaniard. Sorry, an Egyptian, and you've got an American playing a Russian. These are your three leading men in Highlander.
Do you know what I was just thinking? It just popped in my head. Clancy Brown, doesn't he voice Mr. Krabs in SpongeBob SquarePants?
Yes, he does. He voices Mr. Krabs. Yes.
Oh my god! Now I've just imagined that voice as Clancy Brown using that voice. Oh, should add more crazy bonkers energy,
I mentioned like a mixture of the sublime and the ridiculous. I love these actors in these roles, despite the whole accent thing. And like the reason I love Christopher Lambert is he brings such conviction to, I don't know, all of the scenes where, Connor has to process the sorrow and loss and grief of being an immortal. And a lot of this is like the acting he does without speaking. The scene where Connor is sitting by his wife Heather's bedside as she's on her deathbed and like saying goodbye to her. Or the scene where he like rescues Rachel from the Nazis when she's 7. And the later scene where like he's saying goodbye to her when she's an old lady. He brings such conviction to this. And he has some good comic timing in the lighter moments with Connor. I'm thinking of the flashback to like 18th century Massachusetts where he engages in a duel with someone who doesn't know he's immortal and he's repeatedly stabbed and gets back up again. And it's a really funny scene. And a lot of that has to do with like Christopher Lambert's expressions and the way he plays it. And he really handles himself well in the scene where like the cops are grilling him and they keep attempting to get him to trip up, but he always has a ready response and like stares them down fiercely. It's really affecting stuff.
Well, I think often, like, in films that are flawed or do have some issues, generally, the actors are the ones that bring it back up and the ones that kind of keep it strong and keep everything together. So it sounds like in this instance that the actual actors and the performances are something that really makes the movie work.
Well, it's also the case with Sean Connery. He totally sells the sort of sage mentor character. You can believe that this guy has like deep, wells of wisdom to impart. But he also has like a keen sense of comic timing. When, you know, Connor's struggling to get to grips with the rules of being immortal and the intricacies of sword fighting. And yeah, Connery just has this sort of dapper, gentlemanly charm to him. And the mood just lightens whenever he's on screen. He's very compelling, and like you soon forget about the whole accent thing. And with Clancy Brown, he's just like totally like going way over the top in chewing the scenery because his character is pure evil. He has absolutely no redeeming features whatsoever. He's this callous murderer and rapist. He's a bully. He's unnecessarily rude to people all the time. He's just a complete and total cad. And like Clancy Brown just like a character that's that flat and one dimensional should be boring. But Clancy Brown, just through sheer force of personality, makes the character just a hoot to watch.
I think that's actually a testament of the actors themselves. And when, obviously you want to have the, the main character roles. And you think, the only way I can win awards and stuff is, stand out is to be a main character. But I think it seems like it's often the case where people win awards for their supporting roles or for minor roles. Or, there are some people who've won awards for, maybe they've had a scrap of dialogue and, and when you measure the amount of time they've been on screen, it's, 15, 20 minutes. But it seems like he's taken what he was given and he ran with it and did the best that he could. Or, sometimes if you use the most minimum kind of dialogue necessary can make the most impact as well.
Yeah, there's no small parts, only small players. The thing about what you just said, it's also true of a lot of the minor characters that, drift in and out of the movie and are really memorable. I mentioned Connor's African friend Castigier, who has only one scene with him in Central Park. But in that one scene, they have such a strong chemistry together that you can really believe that these two were like friends for hundreds of years. I mentioned all the scenes with like Connor's adopted daughter, Rachel. There's only like a handful of them and they don't have a lot of dialogue, but the strength of their chemistry, their connection, like you totally believe, you're totally sold on the depth of their relationship, the length of their connection to each other. And again, it's an interesting dynamic in that you have someone who is like, looks up to him as a father figure, but he looks like young enough to be her son. And it's an interesting dynamic, but also like the two actresses playing like Connor's love interests, like his first love, Heather, is played by Beatty Edney, and she's sweet, but also intelligent, and she sells the idea of someone who's like a not very educated peasant, but she still has a strong intuitive sense of intelligence. And the same with Brenda, who, as I said, comes from an academic background. She's into studying medieval history, but has to pay the bills by being a consultant for the police and forensic. And she sells the idea of someone who, has academic smarts, but also some street smarts as well. And she's feisty and intelligent, but she's never pointlessly argumentative. And she's well matched with Connor, and they don't get a lot of scenes to establish their relationship, but it clicks. You believe it.
So I think it's really good when you have supporting characters, especially when they're love interests, who have, they're their own character and they're not just there along for the ride. But I think it seems like in this kind of movie, it is like a nuanced character. She's a nuanced person, a love interest who has her own personality and her own background and her own past and her own history. Whereas in a lot of movies, I think often seems like the love interest, whether it be male or female, doesn't ever seem to have a past or a history. It's just like they exist now in what they're doing. So it seems like it's actually a well-developed character, which is unusual.
Well, that's the other thing. Connor's love interests have, like, they have a personality and they have a life beyond just being his love interest.
Yeah, like layers and depth.
And like that seems so obvious, but I think that's another reason why Highlander works. Like even though we don't often get to see a lot of these layers, like they're alluded to.
Yeah.
I mean, the screenplay has to allude to a lot, like beyond what's happening on screen, because like these characters, like Connor is a character who lives for hundreds of years, but there's only 2 hours of screen time they can show of his life.
So obviously you've explained the movie, and it sounds so crazy and convoluted, however still alluring and still something that probably has a lot of charm rolled up with the nonsense, I think. But you have definitely sold to me as something that I want to watch.
Okay.
It just sounds like bonkers, but also just fun. And also you've mentioned, a lot of charming and a lot of softer elements to it, which I think are often missing from a lot of big, more high budget films. So I wanted to ask, what do you like most about it? Like, what have you taken away from this movie, despite its crazy elements?
I'm a romantic, but I also really like action movies. I like, stories of larger than life adventure. And I think what appeals to me about Highlander is the fact that it has all of those elements, thrown together into one movie.
Yeah.
You have this character, Connor MacLeod, who is quite a fierce, determined warrior and sort of the prophesied chosen one in a way. But he also loves very deeply. And I guess the thing is, these relationships that he has are depicted with an uncommon level of like depth and intelligence. His love interests all have, agency and personality. And so it's that mixture of, I guess, sort of the adventurous and the romantic that appeals to me. And it just touches upon other things. Like, I'm a history buff, so the way that this character can like pass through all these sort of ages and different time periods, like pop up in all these different time periods and have adventure. I mean, that appeals to me. The fact that I'm a bit of a nerd myself. The fact that the character's also kind of a nerd. I mean, he's cultured, he's studious. Like, that was something I guess my teenage self connected with, in that you had this cultured, studious, romantic action hero. You couldn't say that about a lot of action films that were made in the 80s and 90s, I don't think.
No. Well, that's sort of something that has drawn me into looking into more about his character as well, because he sounds like just an interesting person in general. Like, often I'll watch movies or TV shows, and despite the flaws of a character and all the character arc, I'll think to myself, you would be really cool to sit down and have a cup of coffee with, Like, I want to pick your brain about things. And in this, Connor seems like someone that I would like to just sit there and just have a chat to about his wild adventures and the people that he's met. And I don't know, I just think he sounds so interesting. Like, I want to know more about villains and everything, and I want to know more about like what it's like living as an immortal, and what is it like being an antique dealer, and have you ever come across crazy stuff like, I don't know, rabbit's foot or cursed items? Like, it just seems like, to me, like, despite flaws from some critics, there seems like a lot of potential here. And in the story itself, like, it's just so unique. And I think that's what has really intrigued me as well. Like, I just want to get to know Connor more and his life. And yeah.
That's all for this week, folks. Thanks for listening. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing and sharing this podcast with your friends. If you have any questions or would like to provide suggestions for future episodes, you can send an email to fantasypodcastfeedback@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.